Hi, I'm Melinda. I'm living with stage 4 adrenocortical carcinoma, and I wanted to talk about the symptoms that led me to my diagnosis. This was right before I started having symptoms. I was born with mild cerebral palsy on my left side, so this was a really big deal to me. I started training myself for my first triathlon in January. We were still kind of in the pandemic, and I wanted something to keep my mind busy, so I started running, cycling, swimming, yoga, lifting, you name it, I was doing it. I was pretty active before that, but I definitely started increasing the amount of times I would exercise. And then I was sleeping maybe like 5 to 7 hours a night. And I would still wake up with so much energy. My tumor did end up being cortisol secreting. So I imagine this is around the time when my cortisol was increasing. And I should have realized like something was off with my body. I work from home, so after I finished my triathlon, I decided to start Airbnb around the country to catch up with friends that I hadn't seen because of the pandemic, and then also just exploring new areas. So after my triathlon, I moved to New York for about 5 weeks, and this is really subtle, but this is when I personally started noticing like a difference in my face. You could see it started to get a bit rounder. So again, this was a symptom of having a cortisol secreting tumor and having Cushing syndrome. That's a very common symptom to like start getting a moon face. I don't think other people realize it, but the other thing I noticed is I was living very close to Central Park at the time, and I was trying to still run, and I was just having a really hard time keeping up with the workouts that I used to do. I felt like my legs just didn't have the muscles that they had before. After New York, I went home to Florida for a minute, but then I went out to Los Angeles for a while. And this is where all of my symptoms started presenting themselves. So while I was there, I think the first thing I noticed was that I had acne on my back, which I don't usually get acne. I know that I'm very grateful for that. But I started to notice a little bit of acne on my back and like right above my butt crack. Sorry, TMI, I don't really care. And I remember thinking, that's weird. Like I haven't had acne in years. And then you can maybe tell here, I'm also in a wetsuit. Personally, I noticed, but again, like my face was continuing to swell, but I felt like my arms and legs were losing muscle, which they were. That is a symptom of Cushing's. I remember going surfing with friends and thinking that like I could barely lift myself up to stand up on the board, which I'm not a surfer. This was a lesson. So it was just for fun, but I was like, something's wrong. And I also started to have swelling in my feet and hands. At the time, I felt like when I would go outside, the swelling would go down. I mean, when I would go outside, the swelling would get worse, and then I'd come inside and shower and I'd feel better. So I kept thinking I was having some kind of allergic reaction to something in LA. I also called an allergist office at the time, and they were like, oh yeah, allergies are going around. So I was just kind of like, okay, this is allergies. I have a little rash. My hands and feet are swelling. My face is swelling. I've never had any of that before, but I've never had any allergy issues before. So I thought, oh, that must be it. This was also in LA. I was actually house sitting for a friend and dog sitting at the time. And a couple friends came over for a pool party, and the other symptom that I was having was really high blood pressure, like ridiculously high. I had never had high blood pressure in my life. I went to visit an allergist in LA, and she was the one who was like, hey, your blood pressure is really high. And I said, do you mean low? And she was like, no, it's really high. And I was like, okay. So from then on, I started monitoring my blood pressure because I was really nervous about it. So I would go inside and shower and then lay down and put my feet up anytime I was outside. Because again, I was still convinced that it had something to do with being outside. This was right after LA. I went to Oakland and explored the Bay Area. My friend chartered a boat for us towards the end of my visit, which was so fun. But right when they discovered that my blood pressure was high, it was about 138/99. This was like about a month later. I'm literally reading the chart that I kept of my blood pressure 3 times a day. On average, it was about 152/99 or 100. So it continued to increase. At the time, I thought it was a reaction to medication that I was taking, compared with, again, some type of allergic reaction. So you can see I was also wearing socks with my Birks at the time. My feet were very swollen. I could barely get them in my shoes. I also felt like when I was barefoot and I would walk around, like I just felt like itchy. My legs, the muscles were definitely atrophying in my legs and arms. Like I started to get really skinny legs, but the bottom of my legs and my feet were still very swollen. My hands were very swollen. My face was very swollen, and my abdomen this is when my abdomen started swelling really bad. But it wasn't consistent. I remember specifically putting overalls on one day and them being tight. Like I couldn't get them up. And then a week later putting them on and they were loose. And I was like, that's weird. So like, I feel like people will watch this and be like, okay, why didn't you go to the hospital? Like, obviously something was seriously wrong. It was, but it wasn't consistently wrong. So I thought, like, there's something environmental that's affecting me. And when I'm away from that, it's getting better. But that was not the case. Oh, I wanted to say at this time too, my hair started falling out. So I started to have balding on my head. I also started to grow hair on my face. So cheeks, chin, lip. Which that's all a sign of having high DHES, which I later found that I did have. But yeah, mine was extremely high. All right, this is when it gets bad. And I'm sorry if I start crying. This is very hard for me to look at. I have not looked at these pictures since I took them. It was for my endocrinologist at the time. So after Oakland, I went home to Florida. I was able to pretty quickly get diagnosed, but that's because things started getting so bad. Obviously, you can see here my face started to, it was huge at that point. My legs were getting skinnier. My tummy was huge. This was actually right after we figured out what was wrong. So the bruising there was because I was taking shots to help prevent blood clots. But I was bruising very easily and I was very slow to heal. I also stopped menstruating at this time. I had a pretty regular period before that. So that was like a big indicator for me that like, okay, my body something's really broken inside. The other really weird ones were that my eyes were swollen. They were itchy and had a lot of discharge. My vision got worse at the time. I also could like barely see out of my eyes because they were so swollen. Hair growth continued all over my face. And then hair growth all over my face, but hair loss on my head was really bad. It was falling out in clumps. And then my hair was matting because my scalp was peeling so bad. And then the other weird symptom that I had was itchy tongue. I had never knew what that was before that. So every time I ate, pretty much my tongue would itch. I started following an anti-inflammatory diet because that made my mouth feel better. But yeah, my tongue was just like constantly itchy. That's my insides. That's what we found in there. So I had a tumor that ended up being 24 centimeters stuck in there. But I just wanted to show that I flew up to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester for my surgery. So this was on a scan that I had done there. Yeah, pretty rough to look at that one too. And this was me, I want to say a few days after surgery. I remember I had a IV in my neck because I did have a blood transfusion. And I can't look at that or I'll throw up. So I couldn't look in any mirrors for a few days and I couldn't take any pictures for a few days. So this was about 5 days after surgery. So that's kind of like, you can see a close up, my cheeks, my eyebrows and all of that. So after surgery, a lot of my physical symptoms went away. The itchy tongue stopped. My blood pressure went back to normal immediately, which was great. The itchy eyes took a little while for that to get better, but it did. And then in terms of cortisol, after my tumor was removed, I had to taper down by taking hydrocortisone orally, taper down to like a normal physiological level. So currently I'm on 20 grams in the morning and 10 in the afternoon. And that's because I had my full adrenal gland removed. So I don't produce any cortisol on my own right now. I also started mitotane, which is a systemic chemotherapy for ACC, and that also basically makes your remaining adrenal gland inactive. So, but yeah, I hope this helps. If you have any questions, comment or send me a DM. I'm happy to answer and share anything else you want to know.